If you want to successfully acquire a business in 2025, you need to master negotiation. After closing 7 deals myself and helping hundreds of my students acquire their first business, I've learned what works and what doesn't. Today, I'm going to show you the exact framework I use to negotiate deals, including the mistakes that kill most acquisitions before they even start. The first is the handshake deal trap. People think verbal agreements mean something, but in reality, they don't. If it is not in writing, it doesn't exist. I've seen countless deals fall apart because of a lack of documentation. Never start due diligence and start spending money without a signed agreement. Do not spend any money on lawyers or on accountants before you have a signed deal. The next is the just keep talking mistake. Many buyers think more conversations equals more progress. I had a student spend over 3 months on numerous calls and still did not have an LOI. He ended up losing that deal to another buyer that actually got it in writing. Every conversation you do past the initial ones without getting something signed is a waste of time. Sellers are going to respect buyers who move with a purpose. The next is the no exclusivity error. Buyers are afraid to ask for exclusivity, so the seller will then shop the deal to other buyers. You're basically doing free due diligence for everyone else around you. Never start due diligence or any other way in which you're spending money without a signed exclusivity clause. This is going to protect your time and your capital investment. The next is the wrong number problem. Sellers will often have unrealistic price expectations when they're selling their business. If you know that they've already rejected higher offers, just walk away. Do not try to waste time trying to negotiate impossible gaps. I had a student try for 4 months to try to close an impossible gap. Not only did he not get the deal, but he probably could have found 2 other deals during that time that actually could have went under contract. Remember, the LOI is everything. Some of the key components are price and the purchase structure, payment terms, and timing. The exclusivity period, which we want a minimum of 60 days. You have due diligence requirements, you have post-closing objections, and the seller's role after closing. Now, why does this matter? 1 is you're going to be setting clear expectations right up front. 2, it's going to protect both parties' interests, both the buyer and the seller. 3 is you're creating a legal framework for the deal from the beginning. One of the most important aspects of this is it shows that you're a serious buyer. When there's a great deal that comes onto the market, there's going to be dozens of interested buyers, and you're going to set yourself apart by being the serious one who actually knows how to go about getting an LOI signed and due diligence started. Also, by having everything written down and a structure from day one, it's going to prevent miscommunication happening throughout the buying process. So let's talk about a couple creative deal structures. 1, you have seller financing options. This is one of the most popular ones, and for good reason. What you're doing here is that the seller is becoming the bank. So for a portion of the purchase price, sometimes all the way up to 100% of the purchase price, the seller will take on the risk that you're going to pay them back the money once you take ownership. One of the great things about getting seller financing is 1, it's going to lower the amount that you need to put down on the down payment for the business. And the second is it keeps the seller really interested in helping you to make sure that once you take over their business, you're doing everything possible to run it well. And if you need help, they're going to be right there because they want to get paid back on the loan that they gave you. If they give you a loan and then you run the business into the ground, guess what? They're not getting paid. So their best interest is to make sure that you're running that business as well as they did. Another popular creative deal financing structure is earnouts. Now, what an earnout is basically you're making an agreement with the seller that once you buy this business, if it performs to a certain level, then they can make more money than the current purchase price. So for example, let's say you bought the business for $1 million, but you have an earnout clause that says if the business does X over the previous year's revenue in the first year after acquisition, then you're going to pay the seller an extra 10% bonus on top of the $1 million. Now, by doing that, you're keeping the seller very engaged in the business because he wants to get that extra $100,000 by making sure that the new business and the new business owner are hitting their revenue goals. Next, you have consulting agreements. Now, with consulting agreements, it's basically just an agreement with the seller to stay on after the acquisition as a consultant, but basically you're giving them a job that they already know how to do, and a lot of times now you're taking all the responsibility because they're not the owner anymore, and they're doing some kind of fine task that they're really good at, and you don't need them in any other part of the business. So usually for that, you're paying them a good 6-figure salary. They're spending 5 to 10 hours a week in the business doing that one thing they do very well, and both parties are happy. Another part of creative deal structures is working capital adjustments. Now, working capital is the capital that you are using to keep the business running. So every business has some level of overhead. And when you buy a company in an asset purchase, you're starting day one with 0 in the bank account. So You buy the company, on Monday there's zero in your bank account, and on Friday is your first payroll. But let's say that no revenue came in that week. You didn't make any sales, or maybe payments haven't hit your bank account yet. So what do? Now that period is usually covered by something called working capital. That could be through a line of credit, it could be through a loan from a bank, or it could be an agreement between the seller to leave a certain amount of cash in the business to help you float through those times when the revenue hasn't hit the new bank account yet. And you can use it as a negotiation lever with the seller so that you're able to leave some cash in the business, therefore reducing the amount of money that you need to take out as a line of credit or as a loan, and you're going to be able to run the business and make sure everything runs smoothly. Okay, so here's a quick example of how a deal could be structured. A student's going to offer $975,000 on a $1.2 million ask from a seller. In that $975,000 that he is offering, he's also asking for 20% of the $975,000 to be seller financing. The student also offered a 2-year consulting contract so that the seller, after closing, has a guaranteed income for the next 2 years being paid from the business to him. The student also gave the seller the option to keep the real estate that was included in the original deal. Now, the seller's real estate was valued less than the difference in price, but it still makes it much closer when we're talking about terms of value. Now, that deal closed because the structure worked for both sides. The student was able to get the price of the business lower than asking, but yet the seller was able to walk away with some assurances that he was going to be taken care of after closing. Let's talk a little bit about reading the seller. Here are some key questions that you should be asking yourself when you're starting to get to know the seller of the business. Number 1, why are they really selling? The best reasons here are retirement, divorce, or there's a health issue. Obviously, divorce and a health issue are not good times of the seller's life, and they're usually in distress. And so you're working with someone who needs to get rid of the business because they have a bigger focus they need to spend their time on. Now, some other reasons that you're going to hear are, I have another business opportunity, so I need to sell this business to take the cash out to go into this other business opportunity. When you're looking at the listing and it shows that this is the best business created since sliced bread, you have to wonder, how good is this other business opportunity? Maybe the current business is not that good. So therefore, they're trying to get rid of it, get the cash out, and go somewhere where they think it's going to be better. So anytime you hear a reason that's outside of divorce, outside of health issues, outside of retirement, really dig in to truly find out why they are selling that business. Next is, what is the seller's ideal timeline? Are they looking to get this deal done tomorrow, or are they fine with it closing sometime this year? Really understand the motivations behind the timeline with the seller. Another question is, does the seller care about specific employees? Now, of course, the seller's going to care about all their employees, but do they have a couple that they really want to take care of? Maybe they have a family member or a dear friend who works in the business. You should know about that. You should know how you're going to breach those dynamics of a seller leaving when there's someone left behind that has a close relationship with them. Make sure you're taking care of them in the best way possible so that there's not a gap that is made between you and the seller when he leaves. One of the biggest questions is, what happens to the seller after they sell the business? And this is one of the biggest parts of negotiation. If you're able to structure a deal where the seller feels they're exiting not only with the amount of money they want, but there's also some upside for them once you acquire the business, and that could be with a little extra equity, could be with a consulting agreement, could be through a rev share agreement. There's a lot of different ways in which you can incentivize that seller to stick around, help you out when you need to, and also that they're able to still feel that they're part of their legacy, which is this business. Another great question is, are they actually ready to retire? A lot of sellers gave their blood, sweat, and tears into this one business for decades, and leaving the business is like leaving a part of their identity. And so are they actually ready to step back and let you take over? Or can you see that they're going to be a little too involved even after they sell you the business? Now, here are some huge red flags that if you see these, definitely be warned. Number 1 is unwilling to share their financials. If they're not willing to give you at least 3 years of their tax returns and P&Ls, then it's not a business that you want to deal with. 2, they keep changing their story. Let's say after the first time you meet the seller, they tell you the reason why they're selling is because of retiring. Then you find out that that's not really the reason. It's because they're in a lot of debt and they need to liquidate their assets in order to pay off the debt. And then you realize that actually that's none of those things. They actually have a great business opportunity that they need to invest in. If the story keeps changing, that is a huge warning sign that this is not a deal that you want to progress with. Number 3, they won't commit to a timeline. If you're talking to a seller and he's hot one day and cold the next, this is most likely going to be a deal that's going to drag out for an inordinate amount of time, wasting your time and your money. 4, if they refuse to sign anything, whether that be an LOI, purchase agreement, IOI, whatever it may be, then that tells you right off the bat that this is not someone that you're going to be able to make a deal with. One of the big ones is the seller being very very emotional about the price. A lot of times it doesn't even make sense. I've seen sellers just shut down a deal because of a difference in price of $10,000. And we're talking about a multi-million-dollar purchase. $10,000 is like a 1% of the price. And I've seen deals die because of it. And so if a seller is so emotional or tied to a number that's beyond reason, they're not willing to negotiate, then it's probably a good idea for you to walk away. Here are some other clear warning signs. You know that the seller has already rejected higher offers already. Next is they keep moving the goalposts. So you think you came to an agreement, you think you had a verbal yes, and then all of a sudden on the day of signing the agreement, they say no dice and they change the terms. Big warning sign. Also, if there's multiple partners in the deal and there's no clear decision maker, these types of deals can drag on forever because you never know who's the person who's actually the one calling the shots. And last but definitely not least, sellers having unrealistic expectations. Now, every seller thinks that their business is the best business. This is something that they spent all their time and energy in building, so you'll understand that. But at the end of the day, this is a formula that needs to fit in order for you to acquire this business and still make the cash flow that you're looking to make. Here's how to make sure that you're not wasting your time. Set clear deadlines. Stick to your numbers. Trust your gut and don't chase bad deals. If you see a red flag, don't make an excuse for it. Just acknowledge it for what it is and move on to the next deal. Always have backup options, and I mean always, on every single part of the deal. Have multiple lenders, have multiple due diligence providers. Always make sure that you're not going to be stopped getting the deal done because somebody else is dropping the ball. Okay, so here is the negotiation framework. On the first call, you're all about building rapport and understanding the motivation of the seller. This is not the call to negotiate price. You're not throwing numbers out there. You are just getting to know the seller, why they're selling the business, what makes that business special, and you're building rapport in a relationship. Now you're on the second call. The first one went really well. This is a time in which you can start to understand what they're trying to sell the business for, dive into the numbers a little bit more, start asking if they're interested in seller financing, and start just kind of measuring how this deal is going to be able to get put together. This is the call where you really start to get a good idea if this thing has any legs to it or if you really need to walk away. If the second call goes great and you're able to receive the last 3 years of financials, everything checks out, the debt service coverage ratio looks good, this is the time where you need to get pen to paper and actually craft a LOI and send that within 48 hours. Part of the LOI being signed is also the exclusivity clause getting done as well. Inside the LOI, there's an exclusivity period. So when they sign that LOI, which has your offer and the breakdown, they're also signing that they are not going to shop around the deal for at least 60 days while you have time to do your due diligence. Speaking of diligence, now you're in the part where you're putting some money into a CPA to do the quality of earnings and also working with an attorney to make sure they're looking at the legal framework and you're seeing what comes back. After a few weeks, you should be getting the findings back, and now you can decide whether or not you're going to renegotiate the original offer. A lot of times you're going to get back the quality of earnings, which goes to all the financials, and it's going to show that the business makes less money than you thought. Obviously, if your purchase price is based off a multiple of cash flow and that cash flow ends up being lower, well, now the price is lower. And so, but now that you have your evidence, you're able to go back to the seller and their broker and present your findings. Sometimes they don't take it well. Other times they do, because at the end of the day, they see the work you did, they see the data, they know that you're not lying, and they know if they're going to sell it, every other buyer out there is going to do the same process, and so they're willing to negotiate with you. Once you have finally settled on a price, now we move to the purchase agreement, which is the legally binding contract that's going to make this transaction happen. Now, if you want to learn about my exact process for finding and closing deals, I have something for you. I have a program called Acquisition ACE where I've helped hundreds of students acquire their first deal. It still takes work and lots of focus, but I know that anyone who is going to work with my team is going to have a much higher chance of success than trying to go at it on their own. So if you want to learn more about working one-on-one with me and my team, follow the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one.